Welcome to A Sip of Inspiration. Every moment in your life is filled with all the opportunities that life has to offer. My name is Stephanie Wilson-Coleman. You see, life is a canvas, and you decide to color. What colors will you choose for your life today? Listen to the words of the song. Greetings and welcome to A Sip of Inspiration. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and I am your host for tonight's show. We promised last month that we would do a second part of our popular show, Gun Violence, Chicago Under Fire. So this is Gun Violence, Chicago Under Fire, Part 2. Joining me for tonight's discussion are two now of my old favorite friends, Reverend Gwindol Tate, who is the founder and senior minister of R.I.S.E. Ministries in Chicago, Illinois, actually in Dalton, Illinois. Gwindol and I have been sort of running around these parts for a long time together. I believe that there can be no true solution and no true healing unless it is grounded in spiritual principles. So generally when I am talking about a problem that is as deep-rooted as gun violence, I like to bring along with me spiritual counsel. He helps to keep me grounded and honest. It helps keep me on the high ground, too. So thank you for joining me again.
Always my pleasure, sweetheart.
And my new best friend, she doesn't know it yet, but this is Ameena Matthews. She dropped everything she had planned to join me here tonight for Part 2, and I really appreciate that. She's with Cure Violence, and she's sort of famous here. As I was doing my little background check, found out that she was the daughter of Jeff Ford, who is a gang leader in a notorious, is what they say, notorious gang leader, right? You know, we didn't see him on any, he doesn't have any TV movies after him, so next time they say notorious, you're going to have to say, somebody write the script and show me the cash. Okay. But with Cure Violence, one of her specialties is dealing with the issues of violence, and actually, she is a violence interrupter. So, thank you all for joining me tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, one of the people in the audience, Miss Roll, has actually written a book called Breaking the Silence, and there's a quote that I start with. Usually I start off with my own, but this is so similar to something that I would say, so I wanted to read this. It said, healing is a process that can only be embarked upon by the brave. It is not sufficient to acknowledge that you are in crises. You must move from seeing yourself as a victim to seeing yourself as a survivor.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was incredibly profound.
It is.
I'm going to sit this over here for that. Now, for the viewers at home, you will have a call-in number at the bottom of the screen. 773-738-1845. I encourage you to dial that number so you can ask your questions and you too can join into the conversation. If you are a wee bit shy, there's always email. There is Inspire, N-S-P-I-R-E, at champagneconnection.com. There is Inspire at asipofinspiration.com. There is Even Inspire at sbcglobal.net, so you have absolutely no excuses. And for those of you at home who are not able to get us through your television set, we are on Ustream.tv, and just search for A Sip of Inspiration. Now with the conversation. We left off in the last show. We were talking about some of the causes for gun violence and the fact that it was on the rise. We talked a little bit about the statistics, 512 deaths in the city of Chicago last year that were attributed to gun violence, and we've gotten off to a really glorious start now. And I think what's been happening over the last couple of days with the weather has actually sort of slowed it down some.
Yes, it did.
So it's almost like the universe is saying, you know, I got to answer for this.
Enough.
The rest of y'all, enough is enough. The rest of y'all are going to bail out war in your basement, but I got this. The one thing that we also talked about is interrupting the violence and the cause of the violence and the systemic issues. And we even got a little bit into the DNA connection with the violence from generations and generations and generations ago. And we talked about people being silent, which is why this book, Breaking the Silence, is important. As we witnessed just recently the Boston bomber, and they were able to apprehend them in record time. And the difference, I think, is that people willingly stood up and came forward and told what they knew. And the minute they told what they knew, they were able to actually apprehend the suspects. So, is the silence code in our community contributing to the problem?
I'll answer that question, Steph. No, the silence code is not contributing only
Okay.
to the problem in our community. When you were talking a little bit about the statistics, about that there were 500 deaths last year, and to clear it up, so our, education is really the key in the understanding we can have conversation. Out of that number, it wasn't gun violence only. There were homeless people that were that had frozen to death. We had several of those in beats that are surrounded the areas that we work in, and car accidents that led to homicide. So just to clear that number up, it just was not from gun violence only. Natural causes that a person had died and it was just so happenly on the streets of Chicago and they were a homeless person. As far as the code of silence of some people will feel like, you know what, it's not my problem, it hasn't happened in my household, it's not on my block, and I won't say anything because it's none of my business. But when we're looking at violence and we're looking at the trauma part about it, if it has not happened in your area or your community of the haves, they eat that trauma bill, because the young man or woman that was killed by gun violence, blunt trauma, or whatever it may be, the hospital has to be paid for that.
That's right.
And who pays for it is us taxpayers.
Right.
So it isn't everybody's problem when we deal with the gun violence or the violence in our community. One thing that is so remarkable for me as being a violence interrupter and have worked in the city of Chicago for the past 6.5, 7 years is because of my consistency, because of me being on the ground consistent, and these young guys and girls know that they can trust me, and having and finding resources for them slows down their reaction to how they feel about rage, for one. For two, they will call me or one of my co-workers before they act out on the violence. So accountability for one's actions is very important when we're looking at the violence of the high-risk participants that we deal with, which is the ages of 16 to 25.
Now, you mentioned accountability for your actions.
Yes.
And that's something that I would think would happen at home. I remember when I was growing up, the joke around the house was, when we had kids making bombs, you couldn't make a sandwich in my mother's house without permission. So we couldn't figure out how you could do that, but we were accountable for our actions. So is that one of the things that's missing in parenting? And if so, how do we get that back into parenting?
Well, it's interesting to note that many of the things that started out positive are co-opted by negative forces and energies, and one of them is the unity that began in the family, that kept the family cohesive, loving each other, cooperating with each other, buttressing each other, making sure that we're there for each other. That spilled out and was co-opted by other forces and used, let's say, in a gang sort of way. The same thing that was really good, the team building, the unity, can be brought into a negative atmosphere. And when that happens, all of a sudden, something whose original intent was to unify becomes unity within a caustic environment. And throughout time, that has happened over and over again. They called it in history the dark forces and the forces of light. But they all began with something good, something positive, something that would allow us to live well together. Well, anything positive can be turned the other way. And when there are forces out there who are quite intelligent and have a different purpose in mind, they'll take the positive, turn it to the negative, use the same modus operandi, and all of a sudden they are more effective than the original intent on the side of light.
It's because I was just thinking about the statistics. 512 deaths, and now everybody's thinking, oh my God, we're just killing each other. We've got to do something. And then, as we investigate the statistics, all of those were not our
Yeah,
children
as you were
killing
saying.
each other.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
of those were other things that would have resulted
Absolutely.
in a death
Absolutely.
anyway.
Right.
Yes.
So as we look at the papers and we are being portrayed daily
Yes.
as just angry people who can't solve their problems, they're again
Painting an ugly picture.
an ugly picture.
Yeah, yeah.
We end up not loving ourselves, looking cross-eyed at our children, okay, looking cross-eyed at our significant others, because we think we're that they're talking about in the
Right,
papers,
right.
and we are not.
And it perpetuates itself. And I think when you look at headlines, for instance, I have never seen a headline that had anything to do with something really positive. Like the community came together and all of a sudden violence went down. No, it's who shot whom or whatever, because that's what sells. The problem with negativity selling is that there's always someone out there who buys it. And when our young people buy it, then all of a sudden in movies and on television, when it's portrayed in such a way as though you're macho and you're the in thing, then they become the thing that they observe. They become the advertisements that come out in the newspapers and on the television at the movies. They seek to be this. I do not believe that this is a natural state. I think that there are some energies in back of it that have that in mind. And we have to have enough discrimination to know who's doing what when, and to give the wisdom to our children that they might be able to discern the difference and know how to act in a fashion that is positive and uplifting to the community.
And when you were speaking about, as far as parenting, and it's funny that you mentioned and you talked about your mother and how you couldn't cook in her kitchen, but there was some accountability, you know, and we're talking about our children having children. My mother was a young girl when I was born. She was 16 when I was born. Wow. I had Medea. And as far as accountability as our community, Stephanie, my grandmother was a single grandmother raising myself, her youngest daughter, and my mother had left home. But there was accountability in our community that whomever we lived next door to and whoever that had black businesses, which that's what was all on the south side of Chicago. When I was coming up, if Ameena was doing something out of pocket, Medea knew about it. But as I was going down 79th Street, I was getting my butt kicked until I got home, and I was getting my butt kicked for whatever they said that I did, and for why did Miss Glenn have to say anything to you. So what we're looking at now is the dynamics of the household. There's young women having children, and they are young, and there's young grandparents. But what is missing, the fine component, is being a neighbor in our hood. Being loving, as you talked about, not, you know, having that distrust in others, not speaking, not talking, not being a neighbor. And what I do, and people look at me like I'm crazy because I was raised that if you walk in the room without speaking, you get knocked down. And then when you get up, you better speak. So I walk past someone and it's like, hello, or assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings, how are you? To make them speak back to us. And if there is a child or a young person that doesn't have a mother, it is our responsibility, and I know I say all the time, I'm getting too old to be bothered with somebody's youngins, but it is our responsibility to wrap our arms around or our tongue of positivity and spiritually put into greatness on our young guys and girls. Not that, you know, yes, I make them pull their pants up. I do. But in a way that I ask them to put their pants up is that you're too handsome to have me or anybody else seeing what your mama should be seeing. And give them the education of where that mentality came from, and spiritually where we come from and why we're here, and also to let them know the design of the setup from all the way in the 60s on why we're here today, based upon a young guys and girls ISAT test and attendance in certain communities of color, may it be black, may it be Latino, may it be lower white, based upon those components, low ISAT and low attendants, they're building penitentiaries.
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it is a
By the
set
time
up
they're in the
of a
fourth grade.
design.
That's right.
And we have to let our young people know that that design is set up for them.
Way
and let's not
ahead.
fall for
Yes,
that
it is.
okey-doke.
Yeah,
Let's not
yeah,
fall for that
yeah,
okey-doke. And I am Jeff Ford's daughter, and I am so proud to be. He is such a good man, and he's such a great, he's a better grandfather than he was a father. Because,
Well.
you know, and he's still a great father. Things that he says to my children are amazing, especially when they get on the internet and they hear that notorious put
Right.
behind it. But like Rev said, the beginning of his journey was organizing,
Yes,
putting
yes.
together and educating our young guys and girls. But then when some other elements got involved, then he turned into a gangbanger, they say. You know, so we have to have some